And a very happy new year to everybody. I'm sure it probably maybe feels like a distant memory already for those of you that perhaps went back to work last week, but welcome. It's great to see so many of you on today's session. Just to sort of recap, I'm Katie Vice, so I'm one of the directors of Better with Money. We're always thrilled to sort of be able to work in partnership with the ICE Benevolent Fund and on behalf of the support network. So, thanks to all of you for taking the time to join us today. Now, with regards to today's session, we are providing just information only, so there's no financial advice being given, and it's really just to arm you with some of the top tips for negotiating a pay rise. We know we're in a very difficult financial economic climate, so firstly it's about making sure we're doing everything we can to make our pay go further. But that said, there's always the opportunity for us to be able to reach out to our employers as well, to just make sure that we understand our worth and that we are maximising all of the opportunity that exists there as well. So for some of you that could be joining the session today, you could be in the process of maybe actively seeking new employment, or you may be already having sort of regular conversations around remuneration. And for some of you, it may just act as a useful session to sort of help you to build up in your confidence with your existing role, just to give you some of those useful hints and tips around sort of maximising your income and how best to approach what can be those quite difficult conversations around sort of salary increases. So we're going to have a look at sort of knowing your worth and building the business case, the importance of timing, practice. So the more that we can get in the throes of sort of practicing those difficult conversations, the more natural and the more confident we're going to feel when they happen. We're also going to have a look at looking at life beyond pay, sort of the way in which we should hold those types of conversations, how we can see sort of rejection as an opportunity, and then, like I said, finishing up with making our pay go further and looking at all the other ways in which we can stretch that salary, particularly when we are still very much in the throes of a cost of living crisis. So the very first sort of top tip that we're going to start with is to know your self-worth. Now, we have obviously moved on now in lots of respects from sort of the times of COVID and the pandemic, where we know that for those sort of 2 years that it took place, people working from home, they were missing out on that sort of direct line management. And arguably, we're still seeing some of that even now, where many, people are still working from home, working remotely. So perhaps we also don't know if we're doing a good job, and we don't feel like we're getting that validation. So before we approach sort of employers for pay increases, it really is important to just spend some time revisiting skill sets and that valuable contribution that you're making to the business, so that we've almost got all of our evidence ready to go, so that we've got our ducks in a row. And the first thing that we need to understand is how our current salary measures up against the average within your industry sector. And the reason that's really important is certainly through some of the coaching that I've been involved with various employees over the years. Sometimes there can be a sort of a misalignment of what we think we should be paid, but actually what the reality of an equivalent role within our same industry. So it's really important for us to make sure that we are doing that market research and how it is comparing within the averages that we find within the various industry sectors. Now, there are loads of sort of salary comparison calculators that are available online. I've provided like a link at the bottom to one that sits on Total Jobs, but there's many of them around, and it sort of allows you to search by job title. You can look at your particular industry, but you can also look at your region as well, so that you can make sure that you are in line or not, as the case may be, to help start to build upon that case sort of case study, to make sure you're then getting paid what you deserve or what you feel you should be deserving of. And in addition to sort of the tools that are available, it is also really important to consider how much demand there is for your specific role as well. And importantly, the impact that it would have on the business if you were indeed to leave, because that can give you greater leverage when negotiating salary. And also, you know, with businesses, especially since COVID times being very fluid, there's maybe been many restructures. It could be possible that you've actually got line management that are in place that actually aren't aware of sort of what your specific skill sets are, and, you know, what you've got as a kind of unique selling point to you and your role, and that could be, you know, just very natural. They're just not aware of that. So actually it's a really positive conversation to be able to make sure that the right stakeholders understand the value that you are bringing to the business as well. And, you know, we also should never shy away from the fact, sadly, that there will also be some situations in some organizations where it could be line managers that are assuming sort of that sort of work and positive praise as their own work without the right key stakeholders actually knowing that you've fed in to a lot of those projects as well. So it's not about undermining anybody else, but it's just making sure that your own self-worth and value is being projected in the right way as well. And when we think about sort of that demand and you know, thinking about the economic climate as well, it is also about being sensitive to the business that you work within. So if you know that it's actually recently won some large contracts that's meant that the company is in quite a strong financial position, then naturally, you know, that timing is very important, versus if you're working in a business where you're actually hearing about restructures or redundancies that are taking place, then it's certainly wise to defer any conversations around sort of salary increases at that particular point until the company's sort of back in a stronger financial position. Because again, you're far more likely to get that positive outcome once, you know, the business is thriving again. Now, when we start thinking about sort of building the business case, so we've sort of assessed our professional worth in advance, we've got an idea of the sort of revised salary that we think that we want and we're deserving of, then the next sort of top tip is to document the reasons why an increased your salary is deserved. And that's where we need to clearly quantify the added value that you are bringing to the business. So creating things like a work journal can be a brilliant place to start. So it enables you to sort of create that record of any recent training. It could be qualifications that you've completed, those key achievements, but also those standout moments, but importantly, measurable ways that they've benefited the employer, because that's what's going to start to prick the ears. That's what's going to justify the financial incentive you're looking for. So formulating that either as a sort of online journal can make it a lot easier to just sort of capture copies of feedback that maybe you get from particular suppliers or clients or contractors, project managers that you've been working alongside. You know, snapshots of any performance reports, you know, if you've been able to bring a project in under budget, you know, making sure that, again, you're taking all of that evidence and just storing it up so that you've got that audit trail as sort of that evidence to your worth as and when it's then going to be requested. Also, if anybody does work in an organization where you have quite formal performance management, then again, this only helps anyway, because rather than getting to the end of the year and having to sort of think, oh, I need to dig deep to sort of remember all of what those key achievements are. Again, if you've kind of just got that online Word document or whatever you've been using to sort of lift and drop examples on there, it makes life so much easier to then be able to just copy and paste it into the relevant sort of performance management documents if you have that sort of situation at work. But when you're thinking about sort of structuring those examples, there's a brilliant acronym that I was actually taught to use for performance appraisals and sort of competency-based interviews many, many years ago. And it's still very relevant now. And it's to always structure each answer as a self-addressed envelope. So SAE. Now, S being situation. A stands for action, and then E is the effect that it had on the business. So if you feel you are in either a competency-based interview, or that's sort of the way that your performance management meetings go, where you are asked to give examples, where you can demonstrate particular skills and value add, then before you sort of go off on a tangent, or you focus on areas that's not really demonstrating the effect, which can be, quite standard, especially when people feel nervous, always just bring it back and think self-addressed envelope, SAE. I need to make sure I'm structuring this, sort of example, argument, so to speak. With S being the situation, I need to focus on A, which is the action that I have taken. And then I need to sum it up on what the positive effects were for the business. So self-addressed envelope, SAE, situation, action, effect. It is a brilliant structure to keep your points succinct, to avoid sort of going off on a tangent, but also failing to actually evidence the part that you played and the impact that it had on the business. And again, we want to really highlight all those skills that you possess that are in short supply, or in fact missing within the organisation as well. So the more that you can prove that you are indispensable to that organisation, the more likely you're going to be to secure the salary that you're looking for. Now, quite clearly, you need to be your own salesperson here. So if you don't believe in your own value, your contribution to the business, then it is really going to be a tough task expecting somebody else to believe in you. And that is why being able to present a sort of strong, factual log of evidence is going to act as a great tool in being able to demonstrate your value that deserves to get that financial recognition that you're looking for. Now, tip number 3 is to strike it right. So timing is everything. Now, money is a very, very sensitive subject. It's not something that should really be discussed with colleagues or broached with your line manager sort of in the middle of the office, or perhaps when they're right in the middle of quite a demanding deadline. It's about making sure your request for a pay increase gets the right focus and the attention that it deserves, but you'll only get that by arranging a specific meeting to discuss it. So try and avoid bringing up those conversations at the end of what's already been a lengthy one-to-one, because it can look as if it's an afterthought. Also, some managers don't appreciate the element of surprise, and it hasn't given them adequate sort of time to prepare. But it's really important to use your relationship with the authorising manager to influence how you're going to approach that meeting. So you may already sort of know what makes them tick, how they work, that they maybe prefer a heads up email first outlining what you're going to want to discuss with them, so that it gives them time. You may have the type of relationship where they can advise you how best to prepare for the meeting as well in advance, so that they ensure that maximum benefit can come from it for both you and for them. It could be that giving away too much information in advance isn't actually the best approach with that certain manager. And it could be more beneficial to just send them a very generic meeting request, but then do all your talking on the day. So it's about using your past experience, that emotional intelligence, to dictate how best to approach that subject, and making sure it sits very much in line with that key stakeholders' mentality and approach as well, so that you're already on their right side. And when you do sort of, send that through, it's about the timing of that request. So you may be privy to information that the leadership team are already under extreme sort of pressure from the exec board, or involved in some critical projects that require all of their focus and attention. So then kind of putting them in a position where they're going to need to then run a salary review past the board may not go down particularly well. So again, use that emotional intelligence to work in your favour. Now, earlier, I did mention about sort of economic climate that we are currently in. We are still in very difficult times. We know that because of the cost of living increases, people are finding it very difficult to be able to run their homes given the salaries they're on. It stands to reason because of where inflation did reach. We are seeing those numbers come down, but it did reach quite an extraordinary level, particularly for the UK, that we've never seen before. And it stands to reason that salary increases being awarded last year perhaps didn't come anywhere close to, at one point, what was the 11.1% inflation that we were running at. And businesses just would not have economically been able to award pay increases that matched that without going into financial difficulty themselves. So many employers have used other forms, maybe, workplace financial education, as a means of helping us to understand what we can do in our own homes to make our pay go further. But it's being sensitive, to that as well, because what we don't want to happen, is to sort of push for a pay increase that actually the consequence could mean a reduction in headcount somewhere else. So, arguably sometimes it's more important for us to just have a job and be able to pay those bills rather than risking putting the employer into financial difficulty where actually everybody ends up sort of losing their job as a result of that. So there is that balancing act to make sure. And also, like we've got right at the bottom, making sure you are fully prepared for those conversations as well. Now, it is a wise old saying, but it's true. Practice does make perfect. So tip number 4 is just to grab a friend over a coffee and role play this out, particularly if you're somebody that feels very uncomfortable with these types of conversations, or perhaps it's not something that you feel particularly experienced in. And we know that negotiating can be uncomfortable for some people. It can make us feel incredibly nervous as well, which can then sort of impair our ability to express ourselves effectively. So the more we can practice, the more comfortable we become, but also the more skilled we actually become at doing it as well. And encourage your friend or whoever you're going to use to kind of role play this out with to ask you some really challenging questions, so that you can practice giving those succinct answers. Again, remembering that framework of self-addressed envelope, SAE, keeping it nice and succinct, very much to the point, and evidence-led. And then run through all of that evidence in your work journal so that you can quantify those examples as well. So the types of example questions you could be asked could be things like, what level of pay rise are you looking for, and how did you arrive at that figure? Why do you think you deserve more money than perhaps a colleague? How have you gone above and beyond even what I deem as your current role requirements? And what sort of extra responsibility would you be prepared to take on for the extra money? Now, from sort of time to time, some of us will experience what's known as imposter syndrome. Now, for anybody who isn't familiar with this, imposter syndrome is a term that was sort of first used in the 1970s. It is sort of thought to be, it's where you sort of believe you're not as competent as others perceive you to be. So you can feel as if you sort of don't belong where you are, or you've only got there through luck. Some other sort of characteristics can be berating your own performance and putting yourself down, self-doubt, sabotaging your own success, fearful that you won't then live up to expectations. And originally, sort of imposter syndrome was thought to apply mainly to high achieving women, but it is now recognised more widely. And it's sort of estimated that around 70% of people, in fact, will experience at least one episode of imposter syndrome at certain points in their lives. So it's really important. Believe in yourself. practice selling yourself and sort of coherently evidencing the value that you bring to the business. And just whilst sort of we're on the topic, if anybody is interested in exploring sort of mind management models in more detail, and looking all at that sort of psychology that exists around the brain and why we maybe start to think the way we do, or self-doubt, then I would highly recommend the chimp paradox model by Professor Steve Peters. It's a fantastic read, and it's certainly one of those reads that, for everybody I've spoken to since, sort of all says that there's moments where you just think, gosh, I can so identify with that, because again, we're all human. Yeah, we all have sort of some of those moments of anxiety and uncomfortable thoughts and feelings, and that doesn't mean it's unusual or it's a bad thing. It's natural, but importantly, we need to then see how we can sort of build our resilience to then overcome that and still project in the best possible way. Now, I mentioned earlier about the importance of sort of timing, but in addition to that, it's also how to sort of approach these types of meetings in the right way. So if you've got as far as sort of successfully securing that meeting where you're going to be discussing a pay rise, then there is an expectation that you are well prepared for it. So a good tip is to view it no different than a job interview. The meeting is an opportunity for you to showcase your worth, but also to influence someone's decision so that you get what you want. So we would never turn up for an interview without having spent a good amount of time preparing. So the same level of preparation applies for salary review meetings as well. Now, presenting a sort of business case should only really take a few minutes. So it's about being mindful of time, and then also remembering to keep those answers short and concise. Again, going back to that self-addressed envelope, that SAE model, when evidencing the impact that you've made. Now, nerves have the ability to make us overcompensate. And very typically, when we're nervous, we will talk too much when negotiating. And there's a huge power that exists in silence. There we go. You've just seen an example of it there. So once you've sort of given your answer, you've made your point, listen to what's being said, and use that time to then think through your next response. It's also really important to note that although the aim of the meeting is to secure a pay increase, negotiation isn't all one-sided. It is really important to build that rapport by appreciating the company's perspective, as well as demonstrating teamwork and acceptance. So if the business isn't in a financial position to increase your salary, then it's not something to take personally, but instead enables you to move the conversation to a really productive place where you can try and get agreement for a review, maybe 6 months down the line instead. Now, it's unlikely for most employers that they are going to agree straight away to your sort of first increase request. There will usually be a negotiation, possibly trade-offs or counter-offers that will be explored. So it's about just being prepared for all the other outcomes which could come, which we've got some detail of on the coming slides as well. Now, the most important factor here is to remain professional and in control at all times. So stick to the matter in hand, those examples detailed in your business journal. It can be very, very easy for emotion to start to take over, to start to feel too passionate, to sort of go off track, start comparing yourself against other people in your team, or bringing up inside knowledge that you maybe have around other people's remuneration. But that is the worst thing to do. You want the company to buy into you and only you. You want to keep you and what you do and everything that you do in their power to make you feel valued, but that will only happen if you conduct yourself in the right way. as well. And also not allow the conversation to derail and to start moving on to other people or other things or other issues that perhaps can start to derail the conversation. Now, on the previous slide, I just mentioned a moment ago about trade-offs and counter offers, and it could be that the company isn't in a position to increase your salary, but they may be able to enhance your benefit package instead. So it's really important to have done your research here as well, to see what scope there could be elsewhere. So, for example, when some people they may get a change their job title, or they might get some increased responsibility that can really help make a positive difference to then their longer term career aspirations and CV. So although it may not be a direct result as an increase to your take home pay, it can just help really accelerate opportunities and market value elsewhere. Now, it is becoming increasingly popular, certainly post-COVID, for people to want to retain that flexible working arrangement. So again, some of their salary could be saved by cutting commuting costs. There's examples of people sort of moving permanently onto home-based contracts, which helps them to then move house to a cheaper area, even buy a bigger house for their money. But also things like additional holiday entitlement, increased pension contributions, or it could be that you explore a training budget to pay for other industry exams or other qualifications, which could help you then secure a promotion or more salary down the line as well. And it's also, about thinking around, what other benefits are there. So, there can be some employee benefits that could be well worth having the conversation, see what difference could be made, because sometimes it's much easier for your manager to get sign off through HR rather than having to present a formal business case to the board for actual additional remuneration budget. So it could be easier for them to just use up budget from somewhere else, like training and development. So always explore that as well. And, if you're anything like me, where growing up you heard the word no far more than what you probably ever heard the word yes. So in an adult life, it's really natural for us to feel angry or aggrieved or quite sad and disappointed. But when we receive a no, so our request as to what we want to do with that. So we need to see the positives. It's not a word that targets you personally. It shouldn't dent your self-worth. It shouldn't make you feel that you're not good enough. It's just somebody's way of saying we're not in a position yet to commit. So try and view that no as a discussion point rather than rejection. It just becomes a new opportunity for you both. So don't allow it to sort of shut down the possibility, but instead just to think about the next steps. Seek that rationale as to why. Work with them to formalize that development plan so that you know why those areas are what they are, and then agree a review date to be able to come back to them and to see what other opportunities can exist as well. And just to sort of finish up, the last tip I just wanted to share is one that we can all do, and that's to create our own pay increase. So there is a misconception that if we just earn a bit more money, then our financial stress would all disappear. But the reality is it doesn't matter how much we earn if we aren't managing our cash flow effectively. So monitoring what we're spending on a monthly basis is really important. So the question I want you to ask yourself is, how often do you review your spending habits? And when was the last time you challenged yourself to create your own pay increase through cost, saving exercises to make that pay go further? And that's all through sort of budgeting and working your way through all of your spend and seeing where you can cut down those costs as well. But it's really important that we do everything we can to maximize making our pay go further. Now, we've discussed lots of different areas associated with sort of negotiating pay increases. So I've noted down some useful websites for you to have a look at, where you can benchmark your salary against sort of industry averages, have a look at what job opportunities exist elsewhere, so then you can use that as evidence in those conversations as well to ensure that the organisation's being market competitive. But I also wanted to just pop up the details as well of both the ICE Benevolent Fund and Support Network, who have obviously sponsored today's webinar. Sadly, they aren't there to give you all a pay increase, but they can provide, and they do provide, invaluable financial, workplace and wellbeing support to you and your families in times of need. So I've put their contact details on there as well, and please do reach out if anybody is experiencing sort of financial hardship. You're not alone, and that's very much what they're here for. So please do reach out. But I'm very, very conscious of time, and it always runs around these little bite-sized sessions. So I'm going to open it up for any questions that we've got.
That's great. Thank you very much, Katie. Lots of really interesting points there. Thank you. We have had a couple of questions come in. So can you recommend any tools for comparing salary in other countries, or is there a global tool that people can use?
Yeah, I'm not aware of a global tool, and obviously that can be tricky because of sort of different sometimes remuneration packages abroad can look very different when there's relocation that needs to be factored in as well. So what I would more suggest is then looking at other competitive firms and organizations that also exist within that country to get a feel for where they're kind of positioning their jobs as well. But again, it's also just knowing your own self-worth. As much as these compare tools are great, but at the end of the day, they don't know you. And they don't know, the magic that you're able to bring to your organization. So therefore, it's about being self-confident and documenting. That's most important. Lots of people go into these salary reviews wanting more money. And then when the challenge comes to say why, there isn't quantitative data to be able to support that around how much they've made for the company and why they're deserving of it. So it's very much around that evidence manual that will hold someone in good stead rather than kind of comparison tools.
That's great, thank you. And we've got someone who's given the example that they're a lead engineer and they're bringing in increased turnover to their business. They're just asking, how would you justify the value that they could add compared to someone else doing the same role? For example, if they weren't there, someone else would have done it. So do you have any tips for that person?
Yeah, I think that can also be where then you're looking. So you're looking at, obviously that actual financial benefit that you've brought to the company, but also it's really important to then think about what else are you doing. And the reason I say that is because also, we all do in our jobs, we all have a role description. So therefore, if we are just actually delivering what we're being paid for anyway, then there's not going to particularly be a really strong argument for us to be able to present ourselves over and above somebody else. So what we need to ensure is that we are also going above and beyond what's in that job description as well, and making sure there's clear evidence to support that as well. If you do feel like not only are you delivering that profit, but yes, someone else is in the department, but actually you've taken on other projects and you've initiated, work elsewhere, and you've sort of taken a lead role when others haven't. It's not about putting others down, but it is about making sure that you are demonstrating how you are going over and above on that role. But the important thing is not to compare against other people. It's just about focusing on what it is that you're doing really well and the value that's having to the business.
That's great, thank you. And I see we've got quite a few questions coming in. I'm only going to ask one more, but we'll do a Q&A document after the session so that everyone's questions can be answered, if that's okay with everyone. I'm going to pick this last question because I think it's something that affects many people. Someone is saying that they've often found that they've been underpaid compared to their male counterparts in the workplace doing the same role. Can you give any advice on how to tackle this issue?
Yeah, so I mean, unfortunately, there's no escaping the fact that we do have huge disparity in organisations when it comes to the gender pay gap with pay and with pensions, and it is typically women that have suffered from that. Now, there's lots of great strides that are being taken by organisations to equalise pay, but if you feel you're in an organisation where that isn't being tackled in the right way, then again, it comes down to making that sort of evidence-based comparison to be able to outline what it is you're delivering versus, you know, what other people are, but actually where there's that discrepancy in salary. Because at the end of the day, this is very much on the government's agenda now as well, to get to equalised pay. So therefore, all companies will have had to have reported their gender pay gap, and they will be being tasked to do something about it. And you would be well within your rights to quite formally take that up with HR as well.